Welcome back to another episode of the Product Ball podcast. I'm your host, Harini Kannan. Today, we are speaking to someone who has been knee deep in enterprise AI long before agents became the buzzword du jour. Our guest today is Apoorva Joshi. She's Senior AI Developer Advocate at MongoDB. Apoorva began her career tracking cyber threats at FireEye, then built ML-powered security analytics at Elastic, and now helps some of the world's largest companies figure out how to store, retrieve, and reason over data with MongoDB's new AI stack. Over the last 6+ years, she has tackled everything from malicious URL detection to user behavior analysis, always with a mix of deep technical rigor and crystal clear storytelling. Today, we'll tap into her frontline experience, what enterprises really want from AI agents, where multi-agent workflows break down, and how to fuse structured and unstructured data without losing your mind. So grab your coffee, hit that follow button, and let's dive in. Apoorva Joshi, welcome to the Product Bull podcast. Super happy to have you here.
Thank you, Harini. Really
Uh,
excited to be here. I know we've spoken in the past on like the same panel and stuff, and just in general, really like everything you've been doing with the podcast and also in life in general. So excited to
uh,
speak with you here today.
Definitely. We are super excited because you've had a couple of talks recently. One in the Deep Learning AI conference, Andrew Ng's conference. It must have been a dream come true for
It was.
any, right? So that was amazing. And
Thank
also
you.
your upcoming talk at ODSC East. So yeah, I think very timely topics. Yeah, so before going ahead, if you can give a short introduction to our audience. Yeah.
Sure, yeah. So I'm Apoorva. I'm currently a senior AI developer advocate at MongoDB. I like to think of myself as a data scientist turned dev advocate. But, well, now that I say it, I just think my current role is an extension of me being a data scientist in the sense that prior to this, I used to write code every day, and I used to do a little bit of like speaking and writing, but I think the proportion of each of those has changed a little bit. And I love writing and speaking, so I like that. I get to do that quite a bit. So in my current role, I write a lot of technical content, build hands on workshops for AI developers, and also get to talk a lot to our customers, which is something I've been wanting to do for a long time. So, yeah, that's me.
That's awesome. And it's a perfect, like a speaker profile for Product Bulb because at Product Bulb, I think the goal is getting, machine learning engineers and data scientists into a more product focused and user focused, customer focused sort of track. So
Very
this is
cool.
perfect. So yeah, to start off with, could you start by giving us a quick overview of AI agents
Mhm.
and why they have become such a hot topic, for enterprises looking to scale AI solutions? I think this also starts with how do you define AI agent? Um,
Okay.
I think a lot of teams are still in that phase. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So the way I like to define it is AI agents, specifically in the generative AI era. We've seen reinforcement learning. That's why I like to add that in the generative AI era are systems that use LLMs or large language models to perform complex tasks from start to finish. Although I do think I want to caveat that by saying in most real world situations at most large enterprises, I think they would benefit from thinking more holistically about LLM autonomy to also consider systems that lie on that spectrum between like simply prompting an LLM to full autonomy. Because in most real world cases, at least right now, there's no real need for unchecked LLM autonomy, right? So agentic systems is what I'm thinking of right now rather than just like that singular AI agents term. But I do understand the urge to jump to agents because with agents, we've augmented the reasoning and understanding capabilities of LLMs with the ability to take actions, right? And this makes them extremely capable and flexible when it comes to performing a wide range of tasks that have like an unstructured, non-deterministic workflow.
Right, absolutely. I think you're calling it of agent system is bang on.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it could just be a wrapper over an LLM and then call it an agent.
Right.
Right. And lot of actually agents in the wild are basically that.
Yeah.
Um,
And you're
but
just using
right,
in a lot of cases you see LLMs being used for certain tasks, but like the actual workflow of the application is could essentially be like fixed by design, right? So more like a control flow than an agent. But just because
right.
it's a it's an LLM working with other APIs and tools, just that doesn't make it an agent. Like that full autonomy is what makes it an agent.
Right. Absolutely. And do you need that autonomy? That's a
Right.
good question you
Yeah.
you had. Excellent. Okay. So now that we have seen what an agent is, how we are defining an agent, now we come to single agent versus multi-step agent, right? So
Okay.
what does a multi-agent workflow look like in practice? You are in a very customer-facing role, very user-facing role. So uh, have you seen multi-agent workflows in the wild? How does it look like? How does it differ from a single agent setup?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I haven't seen that many multi-agent workflows to be honest, because of course, like with multi-agent, you get all the problems of like latency, where one agent itself is hard to debug. Now you have multiple agents, so it's like a
Right,
debugging nightmare. So, and I think just like in terms of expertise, right? Like teams are getting there, so I haven't seen that many in the wild, but yeah, to go back to what multi-agents are, as the name
right.
suggests, it's multiple agents working together to execute a broad range of tasks. But if I had to pick the most common, like multi-agent sort of architecture I've seen is like the supervisor architecture, where you have a single agent that's interfacing with the user or the environment that the agent is running in. And it's also interfacing with other more specialized agents. But this agent is the only one deciding which specialized agent to route a particular task to, reasoning through the results of all these agents, and finally deciding when and if to end the execution.
You're absolutely right. Interestingly, myself and my team,
Hmm.
we are currently working on building agents that are, I won't call it multi-agent because it's not like there's one single supervisor who decides like what to do, but there are nodes within that workflow that does
Yeah, I
that.
was curious. Like, I know you mentioned you're working on multi agents too. So yeah, like what architectures are you seeing out there?
Yeah, that very good question. I would call it a multi-node workflow instead of
Okay.
calling it a multi-agent workflow. I still don't know very clearly how you differentiate when you're defining this to a customer, but basically having like singular agents to specific tasks, and
Okay.
each task is a node, and each node talking to sequentially,
Right.
instead of
Okay.
letting them decide when to talk or whom to talk, but
Yeah.
you providing the sequence. So
Yep.
node A
Okay.
has to happen after node B, after node E, whatever. So you
Yeah.
provide the sequence, and there's like one particular node which has to decide, okay, based on the user input, should I go here or should I go there?
Right.
So that's the one slightly complex node, but other than that, it's a workflow. Like,
I like that.
so right, so how so this is a very specific analyst agent doing like
Hmm.
specific thing, but how a human analyst would do that certain task, you divide that into how this agent would do, or this multi
Right.
workflow agent would do,
Yeah.
and you give very specific tasks to each node. So there's a very deterministic sort of understanding. So you
Yeah,
know that you can measure the accuracy. If something goes wrong, you know that's where you go
exactly.
and check it. So I like calling it workflows. Because these are actually useful, and these can do sort of junior sort of analyst tasks
Right.
in a decent decently accurate way. It's still like developing and everything. But yeah, that's the reason why I was curious to, like, have you seen it in a wild? I have not like particularly seen any use case as in a while.
Right. Yeah,
Go
which
ahead,
is
go ahead.
why I say, like, I think what you're defining, even I like to think of it as a workflow. So when I think of multi-agent, I think of like multiple like LLMs having full autonomy and connected in some
Right,
way. I think like that is a bit too complex for the task that we are currently using LLMs for. But I think
right,
like what you are mentioning, where LLMs are semi-autonomous and connected by some like fixed fixed sequential structure. I think those
right.
are things I am seeing pretty commonly in the wild, though.
Okay, okay.
Yeah,
So, nice. So I think the point that we have surfaced here is the autonomy. Probably the level of autonomy is probably the measure of whether it's
agenticity,
yeah.
if that's even a
Right?
word. Yeah,
Oh my God. Okay. Excellent. I think that's a very, very good answer. I think yeah, I'm curious to know, even, after seeing this episode, if users come up with, like, what are the different workflows that they see in the wild. I know there is a startup, I forget the name, who has a list of like all the generative AI applied generative AI applications in the wild. I forget the
interesting.
name. But
I've
yeah, yeah.
seen I've seen a solid blog from Anthropic on building effective agents. So they had about like 6 to 7 different agentic architectures.
Right, right.
And even Together AI had like a blog that kind of was doing essentially the same thing. I'm writing my
Ah.
own, and you'll see that in a few days.
Ah, excellent. Okay. So, things to note, I will put this all in the show notes. The one from Anthropic. I've not seen the Together AI, so that's interesting point. I will look for that and your blog post, of course.
Thank you.
So, going to the next one, and I think I actually got this tidbit from the abstract from your ODSC East talk
Nice.
about to happen. I think in the abstract you talk about, I think it's a tutorial for how
Mm,
you build agents, and you talked about using LangGraph and MongoDB as a vector database, I think. So, interestingly, I'm also currently using LangGraph, but
oh, cool.
yeah, but I actually don't know whether it's the right framework. I think we just had a call with one of their, like their sales engineer, I think, on, how do we use it, how do we what
Hmm.
are the security concerns and everything. So I'm curious, so before we go into the question, some context to the audience and the users if they are
Yeah,
not familiar with LangGraph. LangGraph is a framework to serve your agents, if I'm not oversimplifying it. But yeah, like, but would love to know your thoughts on, is that the best framework for orchestrating complex agent interactions? Have you used other frameworks? What is your favorite?
sure.
There are, of course, LangGraph
So
versus
many.
CrewAI versus so
Yeah,
many, of course. So
exactly.
yeah, yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, and I'd love to hear your take on what other frameworks you were exploring, but I can
Right.
give you mine, right? So to be very honest, I haven't really worked with a lot of the other frameworks out there, like CrewAI. At some point, AutoGen was getting popular.
Yep.
Now
Yep.
OpenAI has its own agents SDK. But it just so happened that I started with LangGraph. And
Right.
with me, it's like if there's no, if I'm able to do everything I need with a tool, then I didn't really find a reason to switch to it. But essentially, I've looked at some examples and source code from these other libraries. But the big one to me seemed like there was a lot of abstraction going on. So like it was really simple to like put together an agent in 5 minutes. it almost seemed like that was kind of their USP. But if you're building enterprise grade applications, like that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for something that's more extendable, something where I have more control over what I'm trying to do, right? And that's something I found in LangGraph. It's pretty decoupled from LangChain, which again is very heavily abstracted, which is nice. It's very low level, which means the barrier to entry is a bit high compared to these other frameworks. But once you get a hang of it, I thought it pretty much gives you full control over your application's workflow. And like you mentioned, like it's a way to orchestrate LLM applications, and they do it using graphs. So it has three main components: nodes, edges, and state. And nodes are essentially just Python functions, which is also great. Like for the most part, you're working with something that's very familiar to you. You're writing basic Python. So
Right, right.
yeah, I really like that about the framework.
Mhm.
So if you're building a single agent architecture, you essentially have an agent node and a couple of tool nodes. And that also extends to multi-agent, where you just add more nodes for each of the other agents, right? And then
Right.
edges is how you connect the nodes. So, and
Yeah.
these can be fixed, conditional, or loops. And even for the conditions, I can literally write the conditions in Python.
Right.
Uh, so yeah, like just between those two, it gives you a lot of control over your application's workflow. And then finally, they have something called state, which is a shared data structure that all
Right.
nodes can read and write from. And this is how like especially in a multi-agent architecture, that would be the mechanism for all
Right.
these different agents to share information with each other. So
Absolutely. I think that's a great answer and very similar to how you started. I started LangGraph because that was the first one we
right.
experimented with, and that was the first one. Like before I joined, like our existing like engineering team had already experimented with.
Hmm.
To your point, it's I think the entry level barrier is slightly high
Yeah.
compared to maybe say Crew AI and stuff, but once you get
Right.
started, to your point, it gives us a lot of control. Adding a node is super easy. Connecting the
Yeah.
nodes is super easy because it's a graph structure. It's great.
Yeah. It feels a
Um,
lot like something like Airflow or Prefect, right? Like where
exactly.
you're essentially containerizing a piece of Python code and
Right.
you are defining the yeah, like the graph
Right.
component. So very
Right.
similar.
Yeah, yeah. No, you're absolutely right. Yeah, but I do think there are many, as you mentioned, OpenAI's agent SDK
Yeah.
came in what 3 days back.
Yeah, a
Um,
few weeks ago, but yeah, like weeks, days, it's all a blur at this
uh,
point.
oh, okay. I actually knew about it a few days back. The agent
Yeah.
SDK.
Me too, honestly. Like, I seriously gave it a look only a few days back, but I believe it's been
Right.
around for like 3 weeks now.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Timeline is like it's a blur in Gen AI field.
Yeah.
But yeah, the reason why we are also looking for at different options is as you go to enterprise AI level, the pricing differs a lot for LangGraph. So I think pricing could be a key
Like, is
factor.
it if you move to LangGraph Cloud or?
Yeah, yeah. If you want to host your own LangGraph server,
Right.
for a lot of companies where your customers are in highly regulated
Mm-hmm.
industries, they
Right.
may not want your model to live anywhere else other than their environment. They may not want your
Yeah.
agent to have access to,
Right.
or send data to anywhere else.
Yeah.
So
But
those are the situations. Yeah, yeah. Go ahead,
mhm.
go ahead.
But wouldn't you run into the same issue with like any other model or framework too, right? Where
I'm,
you
I'm,
have
I'm.
to, I'm guessing
Uh,
you would.
yeah, yeah. I'm guessing so. And this is the. I think this is the problem that a lot of enterprise Gen AI uh, teams kind of stumble onto because building a
Mhm.
demo is super easy. You can demo
Right.
your agent very easily to a
Yep.
prospect or a customer. When it comes
Yeah.
to productionalizing it, you have security issues, you have RBAC issues, you have
Multi-tenancy, all that
exactly.
stuff. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, that was a whole reason for this question. Okay, if not LangGraph, what else, or what have you used? But uh, I think to your point, I have actually gone through the same journey as you. I started
Yeah.
with LangGraph, so I'm using
Yeah.
LangGraph.
What did I tell you?
Yeah. But no, I recently read Crew AI CEO. I think is moving from Brazil to
I saw
San
that.
Francisco. Right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah.
Coming to the world of opportunities.
Yeah. I also
Um,
saw that like even in their in Crew AI, they have flows
yeah.
now. I know Llama Index also came up with workflows. Even
Right.
in the OpenAI SDK, they have like a
Okay.
they've shown how to like try to build like a more deterministic workflow. So I think all of them are realizing like agents is not the only thing, like agentic
Right.
systems is what they need to like cater to, at least right now.
Absolutely. Right, right. I guess for companies like OpenAI, it's just the next step of like how do you monetize this entire thing? Like, it's not enough to
Yeah.
be an LLM provider because now you have DeepSeek, you have open source
Yeah.
models coming in. So how do you start to
Diversify.
yeah, right, diversify your
Yeah.
like product offerings.
To
So
put
yeah.
it nicely.
I mean, it's great to be a customer in a very competitive, field, but
Yeah.
also it's confusing as a customer as to, what do you do?
Everyone's getting into pretty much the same space. Yep.
Right, right. Awesome. Yeah. So I think the takeaway for the listeners here is go and experiment. There are so many
Yep.
frameworks, so many coming in. There's also the other sort of low code options that actually, yeah, shout out to my engineering team, I think, who, are experimenting with like Langflow and like
Yeah.
frameworks where I think it's like low code, no code. You can simply
Yeah.
drag and drop nodes now. You don't have to write
Right.
Python code
Yeah.
apparently.
I think the other takeaway is like, again, it
Yeah,
depends on your needs, right? Like if you don't need that level of control, if you're good with
right.
just like chaining a bunch of LLM calls or agents, then use something that makes that simpler for you. But if you do need
Exactly.
control, then look at more low-level frameworks like LangGraph
Right.
or
Uh,
whatever else.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's a very good point. Yeah, that's the takeaway is the level of abstraction and the level of control that the framework gives you, I think,
Yeah.
which LangGraph gives you a lot. Perfect. Okay, so moving on to a topic that's very close to you and your company, I think, which is RAG, retrieval augmented generation. So your take. So we have talked about RAG, I think, in the last few episodes in this
Hmm.
podcast. The last a couple of guests were AI engineers who are building, applied Gen AI products or agents. Um, so we'll not go into like what is RAG and everything.
Right.
I'm curious, what are like the highlights that you have come across having worked with customers of MongoDB, who use you as a vector database. Yeah, how does RAG come into play? What sort of RAG frameworks are there? There's agentic RAG, there's vanilla RAG, there are multiple types of RAG.
Yeah.
Yeah, so to your ways of breaking down essential steps of a RAG pipeline
Yeah.
as a user, what do I need to think about? What are the challenges that I need to think about that I would not
Mhm.
know before? Yeah.
That's a really good question. I like that
Yep.
you're like just talking about like what is the goal of RAG. I think a lot of times,
Right.
uh, like with customers too, we see them like over-indexing on like, hey, light RAG came out. Like, how do I use light RAG or like C RAG? How do I use that? But like we lose sight of the goal sometimes, where the goal is to like get your LLM the most relevant data to answer a particular question. Basically, building a recommender system for an LLM. That is your goal with RAG, the
Nice.
way I
Okay.
like to think of it, right? So
Okay.
it doesn't matter if you're using like knowledge graphs, vector search, hybrid search, whatever is getting you, whatever technique gets you the most relevant information, that is what you're trying to build. But
Right.
that said, I think some interesting patterns, like we've been getting asked a lot about like knowledge graphs, because especially in industries like healthcare or legal, where that like relationships between data is very important, or like techniques like parent document retrieval or like context summarization, where you augment that vector search with like something more. Like parent documents, like you're still trying to like tie that relationship to the parent document.
Right.
What was the other thing? Summarization, where you're like augmenting those embeddings with like a summary of what the chunk is about, things like that.
Ah,
So those have been interesting. One other big one that's coming up right now, especially as things are moving from just like RAG to like agentic RAG and agents, is like self-querying retrieval, where if you have a question and you need to like retrieve data from like an RDBMS system or a MongoDB database, then you need to go from that natural language query to a structured query that you can run against your database. You're not going to be able
right,
to run natural language queries against your database.
right,
So then it essentially becomes like you have that retrieval tool, which is actually executing the query against your database, but you also need to like augment the agent with these additional tools that guide it on how to go from that natural language to that structured query. So things like in MongoDB land, it might be like I have like a 50 collections in my cluster. Which collection has the most relevant data for this query?
ah,
Or like any filters that I can apply along with that vector search. So yeah, you kind of need like that retrieval tool plus something else to go from
right.
natural language to that self-querying mechanism.
Right. No, these are awesome. These are very good points. Few actually I did not think about before. One was the parent-child kind of relationship, how you look at the dogs, and the last one you mentioned, I think is super important. Within an agent, you have like
Hmm.
multiple nodes doing multiple stuff, and you cannot have all of them go and look for everything because you're going to lose context. So what is that extra information or context we can give
Right.
to get the right information? Absolutely, I think this segment alone would be very useful for
Okay. I'm
for
glad.
for engineers who are and teams who are building RAG pipelines. So awesome, yeah, yeah.
Cool.
And I think these pointers that you have mentioned pretty much should act like, okay, these are the terms and these are the latest technologies that you have mentioned. So go and look for and
Look
search
up.
for,
Yeah.
yeah, how do you implement it in your
Right.
own existing vector database or MongoDBs. Right.
Yeah.
Excellent. So nicely segueing into the next topic, which is
Mhm.
what's the right vector database? I know you're a very non-biased person, so
Yeah. And here
right,
I am with my MongoDB t-shirt.
exactly. No, but in general, you have been a data scientist for a long
Mhm.
time now. You've worked in like security
Yeah.
domain for a long time. So uh, I think you're the best person to answer, sort of being from like different worlds.
Mhm.
What are the factors a team should consider when
Mhm.
selecting a vector database? Today you
Yeah.
have tons, including MongoDB. There are many like Pinecone and VV8 and so many.
Yeah.
So what are the top factors that you need to consider to select a vector database? The other sub question here is, how do each vector database differ in terms of performance and security and like
Mhm.
or do your customers actually look at that? Like I'm curious for teams who are like
Yeah.
starting from scratch. What do you think?
Oh yeah, 100%. And I think you brought up like the two big ones, like performance and security. Those are the two big ones that teams ask us
Right.
about.
Hmm.
So let's talk about performance first, right? So
Right.
most applications, including LLMs, have not just vector storage needs, but they also need to be able to store like operational data or metadata. And as we move into agents, like memory, which
Right.
is like if you really bring it down to its fundamental level, it's like I would call it operational data. So a
Yeah.
database, wink, wink, needs to be able to handle all these different types of data. I think being able to unify all of these into a single system is a good way to, in terms of like performance and like that overall
Right.
maintenance, because you're now not having to sync between uh, two different systems, one for your operational data and one for your vector data. So
Right.
in that
Right.
sense, like that is one thing. Like when I say this to a lot of customers about MongoDB,
Hmm.
that really resonates with them.
Okay.
Um, and from a security perspective, a lot of people are looking for like inbuilt fine-grained access controls, like either like role-based or
Yeah.
policy-based access controls. But I always find this to be a security to be a weird one, because like
Right.
your database is a part of a larger system. So
Yeah.
securing that system is more important, because if an attacker has reached your database, then you have bigger problems, right?
Right.
Also, you can have all the security controls on your data or your database, but
Right.
at the end of the day, you're passing this data on to an LLM provider. So you've
Right.
opened way more attack surfaces during that transition. Like,
Right.
yeah. So like SQL injection, prompt injection, and
Prompt
then like
injection.
what
Yeah.
the LLM provider themselves do with your data. Like, I think those are the bigger concerns than
Right.
yeah, your database being secure. I mean, that is, I'm not disregarding that concern. I'm just saying, like, what happens to it after is a big
Yeah.
concern. Yeah.
No, no, absolutely, you're right. I think security has been, to your point, even within the company that I work at, has been the top priority
Hmm.
when we talk about agents in production.
Right.
Where's the model living? Where's the which vector database are you using? Where are they living? How do they connect to your agent? How does your agent connect to the model that you are using?
Yeah.
Um, Absolutely. Um, I think one sub question, probably selfishly as well. Like we are using a vector database as well. I won't say which one. But yes, we're familiar with all the, like the
I won't
latest and the
bite.
greatest. No, no. So, um, for vector database companies in general, is it a plus point for MongoDB that MongoDB has already been in the space as a, like a NoSQL database for a long time, and now it has gone
Mhm.
into vector database versus absolutely new companies entering the um, arena? How does that make a difference? So this is for, say, a general company looking at MongoDB versus someone else.
Mhm.
Like, would you think that actually makes a difference, or do you think your VectorDB customers are separate from your actual existing product customers?
Oh, I I think I didn't want to mention that one because I think that's a little more of a subjective factor. So that's why I was
Right.
sticking to the more objective things. But I
Okay.
do think that's a factor because a lot
Okay.
of our vector database customers are existing Mongo customers who've had a good experience with MongoDB and want to use
Right.
our vector database offering.
Right.
We also, at conferences and stuff, we also end up
Mhm.
meeting like folks who might not know that we have a vector database offering. But the minute we tell them, like, hey, we also have a vector search offering now, they're
Right.
like, oh, well, like I already use MongoDB, so why not just go use that? So I think there is a
Right.
demand for products that have been around for a long time and which provide that unification of like operational and vector data, if
Right.
that's
Uh,
possible. Like
right.
the one thing I wanted to add is one other organizational constraint that we see with large enterprises is like
Mhm.
getting vendors approved, right? So say some teams in the organization are already using MongoDB, and then
Right.
like this team that wants to use a vector database says like I want to use like some other product X. Like a lot of times they have to go through like a legal approval process to bring that new vendor on.
Right.
So that's a big one that works in the favor of products that have just or databases that the organization has already been using.
Right. You're absolutely right. Yeah. Having been through the process of building agents and then presenting in front of customers, that's the first
Yeah.
sort of step, which is, if you're using some kind of LLM, okay, can you have something? Can we use LLM from, say, AWS Bedrock, or say, Azure
Right.
OpenAI, because we already have that asked from
Mhm.
or legal team. So
Exactly.
yeah, these are the things you don't think about when you demo, and you think about when you productionalize your agent.
Exactly.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that was a very good starting point for people to look at vector databases, I think. The next topic, uh, organically segueing into, you talked about, I think agent memory is a huge topic. You just gave a talk on it in Andrew Ng's Deep Learning AI conference. So if you can simply summarize your
Mhm.
talk, how do you handle each type of memory in code? How does vector database facilitates, any vector database sort of facilitates this memory managing of an agent?
Sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So in my talk, and this is a realization that came to me as I was experimenting with stuff. Like, it's like
Okay.
memory management is a good old CRUD operation.
Yeah.
And that was just what I said.
I think
And
that's a one-liner and you can understand. Yeah. Yeah.
exactly, yeah. So you need to be able to figure out how to and what memories to create, how to retrieve them effectively, how to update and correct existing memories, and finally delete or phase out old
Right.
memories. And not
Right.
mean to simplify it, but essentially this is the stuff that you need to figure out, right?
Right.
And I tried this out on a personal assistant kind of use case before I gave that talk. And I think this is also an important point. So like right now, like just building this like generic definition of memories is not going to work. It's going to differ from application to application because what insights you want to extract from your raw, I don't know, tool outcomes, reasoning traces, human feedback, that's going to look different for different applications.
Right.
That's a
Right.
big one.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right.
So anyway, I think of at least memory creation, retrieval, and updates can be orchestrated using prompting and tools. So essentially, you could prompt the agent on what memories to extract and when to extract them, and some guidance on how to reconcile old memories with new ones, and then provide tools for actually doing the creation, retrieval, and update. So where we usually think of just like external tools for the agent, these kind of become like internal tools for the agent. And
Right.
at least in my toy example, I saw that the agent was pretty intuitive, which was very interesting to see. Like, it had good intuition for when to invoke each of these tools. So I think just from like LLMs getting better at reasoning and us implementing these like memory management mechanisms, that's going to be like really solid as we enter into this AI agents era. And then coming to like if I had to like shamelessly plug MongoDB in, because it's a CRUD operation and operational
Right.
database like MongoDB becomes a great fit because it's been
Right.
designed for effectively handling CRUD operations at scale. I think the aggregation framework also comes handy because then you can craft like custom scoring mechanisms for retrieving memories. So um, there was
Right.
this interesting paper from Stanford that was basically assigning a score to each memory during the retrieval process, and there were that was like a function of relevance, recency, and importance. So those kind of that's like a more,
Interesting.
yeah, custom scoring mechanism, and those are kind of things that you can do with like aggregation frameworks.
Right. Awesome. I think if you have a link to the talk, we'll definitely
Mhm.
put that in the show notes, or if it's going to come later.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're defining of simply the memory management as a core operation. It's absolutely right. Like you just have to figure out, when and where and how you store it and when do you delete it, and
Yeah,
basically,
which of course is not a trivial problem,
yeah.
but it helps to think of it in like I at least
Right.
like when I jump into something new, it helps me to tie this new thing to like things that I'm more familiar with. So
Right. Absolutely. I think that's perfect way of putting it. Um, and I would add, this is actually, I mean, you don't think about this a lot when you're building a demo or like demo of an
mm,
agent where, from end to end you show a use case and you're done. But
yeah,
in real enterprise scenario, you're basically you're going to have to, figure out, how long do you need to have the agent, store some
Yeah.
memory. And how are current applications doing it. They have threads and they have those memories, and are you going to be able to afford to do that?
Yeah.
Both from technical compute wise as well as from a financial perspective. And if not,
Right.
then what's the best way to do that from a security perspective? How long can you do that? Where can you store it and all that?
Yep.
um so yeah, I think it's one of those not so talked about background things, which is very important when you start thinking about
I think
productionizing an agent.
I think that's because like again, like I go back to like we don't really have a real need for long-term memory right now. Like this comes
Right,
into the picture more when you think about like personalization or like those
right,
simulation video games or like
right,
an extreme take on code gen would be like use the agent's long-term memory to like
right,
rectify errors, but there's ways to like rectify that
right.
using like reflect and critique and stuff like that. So I
Correct.
can see why this is an abstract concept to a lot of people right now, just because
Right,
like it's hard to see a real need for it right now. But yeah, as we think of like again going back to the autonomy, right? Agents are
right,
fully autonomous, it's going to become more and more important.
right. Interestingly, in our use case, um, it was actually an ask and a question, from customers as to, okay, so how long can the agent like keep things in memory that I gave whatever feedback I have given, so that I don't have to keep giving them again and again. So you start thinking
Mm,
about, do you have that in memory? Do you simply dump that memory into like some sort of a vector database and then have it and
right.
make
Yeah.
it back into a RAG pipeline instead of
Mm,
having things in memory?
yeah.
Yeah,
But in
it's
those
an interesting.
cases, I think in those cases though, like just storing the conversations is good
Right,
enough. But like
caching
when
it.
you think
Yeah,
about, yeah, when you think about long-term memories, though, you can't, like, how many raw memories are you just going to store, right? Like when you
right,
think of us, like imagine if we remembered every single detail of like a thing that happened when you
right,
were 5 years old. Just not
right.
practical. Yeah.
Exactly. Interesting. Yeah, it's a very good um sort of line of thought. I
Yeah.
I think when we design the agents. Perfect. That was a great uh sort of topic, and I'm very glad that you actually had a whole talk on that. So that's awesome.
Yeah. I'll share the recording when I have it.
Excellent. Sounds good. Okay. So moving on to the next topic about structured and unstructured data. Very relevant to
Yeah.
MongoDB. But also getting very relevant to sort of all the enterprises, I think, because
Yeah.
almost all enterprises have unstructured data in terms of tribal knowledge, in terms of whatever you have information everywhere. Not all of them
Yeah.
have been structured and then put into a relational database. So
Mm.
um, how do you recommend fusing these data sources of structured and unstructured data sets? This is specifically in terms of building an AI agent pipeline. So
Got it.
I think you are a great person to answer that because you're working in MongoDB. So you have seen sort of both the sides, customers
Yeah.
having structured data sets as well as having sort of unstructured data in whichever format. So
Right.
yeah, your thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah, I think like I think I briefly mentioned this before, right? Like the thing that really resonates with folks about Mongo is like a lot of times people think like if you have relational or structured data, it needs to be in an RDBMS. But and that's I call that a misconception because like moving to a document schema doesn't mean you're losing those relationships. It's just a different
Right.
way of modeling data. Like all data is relational.
Right.
There's no such thing as non-relational data. Hot take.
Right.
So in
Yes.
document,
Yes.
yeah, in document databases, it's just modeled differently. So instead of having data in different tables and connecting them using joins at read, someone said this, and I think this one line really like explains it. Like in RDBMS, you're doing joins at read, but with like document databases like Mongo, you're doing joins at write.
Right. Nice.
right?
That actually makes
So
sense. Yeah.
so I think like the big one when working with like relational and unstructured data with agents and like LLM applications in general is like if you fuse your data sources to have both types of data in one place, then that like greatly improves or streamlines your pipeline, right? Because now you're just dealing with a single query format and going back to that like self-querying retrieval, like pretty much all cases where you need to go from natural language to like retrieving data, you need to go from like natural language to like some structured query language. So if you have
Right.
multiple uh, data sources, for example, if you had structured data in an RDBMS and unstructured data in MongoDB, then you need to go from like text to SQL probably, and then text to MongoDB's like we call it query API, and
Right.
that's just yeah.
Adding
So
more cycles to
exactly. More
how to get
cycles,
your data.
more unreliability,
Yeah.
because it's just like two different query languages to translate stuff to. So yeah,
Right.
like
Uh,
unify your data sources would be my recommendation.
right. That's an interesting point. I'm curious. I mean, this leads to a whole lot of questions, but I think there are some companies, some use cases where you actually don't need, sort of databases where you need to plug into like traditional machine learning models. Um, but there are companies, maybe like existing like large enterprises where you have both. You have like traditional ML teams, and then you have these Gen AI teams. In which case, it becomes a curious,
100%.
yeah,
Yeah.
interesting, yeah,
Yeah.
uh,
Because definitely, I totally agree with you. Like,
right,
yeah, like there might be a need for but then again, like if you're doing traditional machine learning, as I'm sure you've seen, like work with a
right,
database, right? You work with some sort
right.
of like feature store or blob storage.
Exactly, exactly.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, interesting times we live in.
yeah,
No,
definitely,
absolutely. But yeah, me working in startup, it's like, yeah, what I have seen is the speed is the most important factor.
yeah,
So the speed in terms of everything, speed in terms of building products, getting it to the customer and everything. So
yep,
obviously LLMs make it very fast, and as long as it's reliable, then you gotta do the pros and cons of, okay, what do you what's the cost of going with the traditional ML, versus
yeah,
like LLM powered agent or whatever.
right.
um but yeah, interesting times.
Interesting times for sure.
Exactly. Awesome. I think that was a very good conversation on structured versus unstructured. Okay, so the next topic, I think probably your overall take on productionizing agents. If you
Hmm.
have seen some, really interesting real world
Hmm.
deployment considerations that, audience has to be aware of, which you would not think about when simply demoing an agent.
Yeah.
So yeah, some tidbits on, uptime, latency, security, all these things that are at background but comes forward when you're
Hmm.
deploying an agent.
Yeah.
So yeah, your general thoughts, like what have you seen? Yeah.
Yeah. I think I'd actually have a slightly different viewpoint, and because we
Okay.
have touched a little bit on like performance and
Right.
latency and reliability and that kind of stuff, right? Data
Right.
security. I think the one thing that enterprises don't think about as much is like I think they don't ground themselves in what their business goals and objectives are. Like right now, I feel like there's this tendency to overcomplicate things by chasing every new model, framework, design pattern that comes out. But it's frankly not sustainable, and that is hurting your system more than anything else because when you're doing that, it's impossible to like thoroughly test these systems. And then guess what? You're shipping these systems without testing them. So in the long run, that is hurting the reliability potentially because you're overcomplicating it, hurting the latency and security of your system. So I think like all those problems kind of go back to this more fundamental problem of yeah, keeping up with the hype.
Right. You touched a very, very important topic. Something I'm very passionate about in terms of like product bulb itself is at the end of the day, it's a product focused or, like problem focused building instead of,
Yes.
here's a cool tool that I have. What can I solve?
Yeah.
No, absolutely. I think,
I think
um,
it's a somewhat unpopular take right now. Like, I don't want to sound like the person who's standing in the way of innovation. But then, yeah, like if
right,
you're talking about like actually building things that are useful, trustworthy, and reliable, then I think like we need more people to talk about this aspect of things rather than just like, here's a new framework,
right,
we should go use it. Like, tell me why I should use this,
right.
when I should use this. We need more of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. I think you're bang on. Um, we don't talk enough about why this versus something else that is already existing and an improvement over that versus, completely change to an AI agent. Um, at the same time, I don't know, it's a very tricky thing, right? Like being an
Hmm.
AI engineer who's building agents,
Yeah.
obviously there's a bias, but also you do see that agentifying something kind of brings in that delight factor that was not there probably when you're simply seeing it as a,
Yeah.
I don't know, as a dashboard or something, and suddenly
Hmm.
something seems much more smaller.
Yeah.
um and it sort of, I think agentifying also sort of democratizes the access. Like, earlier only a certain subset of segment of users could understand the product, but now a larger segment of users can understand the product.
Yeah.
But you're right. A lot of we don't speak enough about how are you evaluating this. If you're
Yeah.
saying this is better than that, like if I am saying if agent modality is better than say some kind of dash mode modality, why? Like
Yeah.
how by how much? Like what metric are you measuring?
Yeah. 100%.
Um,
And I think about
yeah,
like even as an engineer, right? Like that delight factor like is big for us too. Like when you put together like yeah, you're used to like as a data scientist, you've trained like millions of models, but now it's like this does feel a little like magical because there's that
I know.
element of the unknown, right?
Right,
So yeah, like why that's why I do get the tendency and urge to like jump to
right,
that shiny new thing. But yeah, like
right,
if at the end of the day you're going to get into a lawsuit or like lose millions because the thing that you built isn't performing the way you wanted, then
right. Or
guess what?
performing inaccurately. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah. Uh, you're absolutely right. We are we are talking about a lot of the very uncomfortable uh, topics that we need to talk about
yeah.
when productionalizing agents. But no, I think there are so many, I think, points to sort of drill down and kind of go deeper into. But I think it's nice to see that currently. I think I've been seeing at least for the last week, like a lot of papers on evaluation, a lot of
Mhm.
topics about okay, how do you evaluate these agents? So I think 2025, 26 is going to be sort of
Yeah, I'm
grounding your,
optimistic. Yep.
yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Awesome. On that note, handling edge cases
Mhm.
and having human feedback.
Mhm.
Have you seen any weird because you're working a lot with like users and like customers? I'm curious to see if you have very uh, absolutely gone wrong stories or any weird stories
Thankfully
about.
not.
Okay.
At the moment, thankfully not. But I think like
Okay.
all of us have read those in the wild, right? Like,
Yeah, of
yeah.
course. Google making
So
that thing. I mean,
yeah, or like
um,
some chatbot said like I'm gonna give
yep,
you this thing for free, or like
yeah, yeah,
someone using like what an LLM said to prep a
yep,
legal case. So I mean
yeah,
those
yeah,
are good reminders. Like it could happen to anybody, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And hence you have to have those evaluation frameworks.
Yeah.
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
I get reminded of incident. I think this is all well known, but a company called Character AI, I think has been acquired now. But yeah, one of their users um, did exactly what I don't know, the chatbot said, and the chatbot
Yeah,
said something that should not have said. But
I
yeah,
saw that one.
right, like it
Yep.
shows, how you could not have thought about certain user segments who, like children and kids who
Yeah.
would use it in not the right way.
Right.
Um, but yeah, to your point, I think, and that's the reason why I keep going back to, even when we're talking about like multi-agent frameworks,
Mm-hmm.
having workflows and
Yeah.
predefined steps instead of your
Yep.
LLM deciding what to do.
Yeah.
I
And also
mean,
like guardrails or like just having some interrupts for the LM to like seek feedback from a human or like for a human to
exactly.
explicitly introduce like feedback into the loop. Like
Right.
we did have a customer it was like a health insurance use case.
Okay.
And they're like, hey, like, how do I implement agents? I'm like, the first thing you do is implement guardrails and some sort of human feedback. Do not just like yes or
Right.
no a claim based on something an LLM said.
Right. No,
Yeah.
absolutely. You're so right. I would not want an AI agent to simply decide on,
Yeah.
whether you get covered or not. That's a very good takeaway from this topic, I think. Have your feedback loops and, human in the loop in
Guardrails in
place.
place. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So the next topic is actually pretty like this question is a very broad one. You can interpret it in whatever way you want,
Okay.
which is proactive versus reactive agents.
Mm.
We often think of agents as reactive, like, if something happens, how does a agent react? How does a
Right.
agent take the input and give out the output? But how do you see proactive agent behavior? Like, how much of a control would you give to an agent?
Mm.
Um, can an agent forecast the user needs and predict it and then be more useful? Do you think we are
Interesting.
there?
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
yeah. How does it play out in real world? Like
Yeah, like this is a
yeah,
more, like you said,
meta
open-ended.
question.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I think like a lot to unpack here, right? Like
Yeah.
whether we are there is one, but also like how comfortable would you be is a whole other dimension, right?
Correct.
Like I feel like yeah, with agents, like the whole thing is like how comfortable are we? And like there's been like if you look at your own experience, like it shows that we still need like that. We consider humans to be like the source of truth.
Yeah.
I know. I think someone was telling me HP put like an agentic chatbot or I don't know what the framework is. They put a
Okay.
chatbot on their website, but they introduce
Okay.
like a 15-minute wait time to talk to a human personnel, just so people could use their chatbot. But that means people weren't going to
Ah,
that chatbot to begin with, which kind of like indicates that there's this like some degree of like mistrust on
right.
an
Right.
agentic
Right.
tool right now. We want to like if a human tells you a thing, that's when you think it's you take that as the ground truth essentially,
Right.
which is
Right.
interesting. So like how comfortable we are is a
Yeah.
whole different existential question almost. But if I were to purely think about it in like how this would work in like in terms of like implementation and what's needed, then I think
Right.
memory plays a huge role here, right? So
Yeah.
if the
Yeah.
agent can maintain context of in terms of personalization of your goals, your progress towards a certain thing, then maybe it can identify opportunities for assistance. And the way that could
Right.
happen is like through background tasks or like listeners that are monitoring the
Right.
environment for certain events or triggers and then feed these into an agent so it can determine the appropriate action. And I think we are seeing this
Right.
to an extent already. Like I
Right.
I definitely think there's like some sort of LLM or agent built into tools like Gmail or Microsoft
Yeah.
365 because like
Yeah.
whenever I don't respond to an email for a few days, it's like, hey, like you didn't respond to this email. So it is
Right.
kind of monitoring my inbox to an extent. So I
Right.
think like something like that combined with long-term memory that kind of gets into like
Right.
personalization.
Right. I think it differs on from like use case to use case. Like,
Mhm.
I'm okay if an agent sort of automates my inbox versus am I okay if the LLM is my doctor, right?
Yeah, or my
Um, uh,
therapist. Like,
yeah,
no, I'm not.
I know. Absolutely. It's interesting, right? So I think there's a study, you would have seen this, I came across this from a post from Professor Ethan Mollick, who's the very
Hmm.
famous AI professor from
Yeah,
Wharton, I think.
yeah.
Um, he posted this, I think it's a study from somewhere else, which is when compared to doctors making their own decisions versus
Mhm.
doctor LLMs making their own decisions versus real doctors assisted by LLMs, um, that is the group that actually scored the highest accuracy, which is doctors assisted by LLMs. Even doctors themselves
Interesting.
were not
Oh, okay.
the highest scoring. So the best outcome is when you have an agent or an LLM or whatever
Yeah,
assist human,
yeah.
um,
Which makes
and
sense. Yeah.
right,
I
right,
think of LLMs, like even our future, I think of LLMs as augmenting our agency. I don't
right,
think of them just like being in the ether on their own. So that makes sense because like they're
yeah,
essentially bringing like all the information that a human couldn't like process
exactly.
on their own to a human. So
Right.
yeah.
No, yeah, you're absolutely right. It's like agent is our sort of this memory that we don't have,
Yeah,
sort of the entire vast
exactly. Some
zoomed
people
out stuff.
call agents or like LLMs like the second brain,
Yeah,
which
right. Yeah, which
makes a
makes
ton of
sense.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. All right, we are all pro agents. Okay. Awesome. Okay, so the last two sort of technical questions.
Hmm.
Um, tooling, a very important topic for agents.
Yeah.
An agent is only as good as what sort of tools it has access to and what sort of data it has access to.
Yeah.
So, yeah, for the developers who are jumping in right now, like what are
Hmm.
some of the open source like? Is there any open source library that you have used recently that you're very excited about? Or you want users to start experimenting like yeah,
Mm, let's see. I think interesting and practical, again, two
yeah,
different things, right?
yeah, true,
Uh,
true, true, yeah,
yeah. But
uh,
building agents, I think my stack personally is LangGraph, MongoDB, and OpenAI, and then
okay,
other tools as needed depending on the use case. MongoDB
right.
because, of course,
Of course.
OpenAI because, yeah, like within our
Yeah,
organization, there's just an easy way for us to get like API keys, and I'm not paying
right,
for it.
okay.
And
Right,
then I think open source LLMs are nice, but you kind of need to figure out where to run them, what kind of
right,
hardware you need, and their quirks in terms of formatting the LLM messages a certain way. So yeah,
right,
like that's a stack I find easiest to work with, and LangGraph
right,
obviously because I stumbled onto it and I put in the
yeah,
time to like actually get comfortable with it. So
right,
yeah, I would say kind of like figure out your primitives and
right,
until you hit find what the gaps are. If there's something else that solves that gap, switch to that. Otherwise, like,
right,
yeah, stick to
absolutely.
that stack.
I think that's a good advice. The last, I think, sort of technical question. So looking ahead at the future of
Mm.
enterprise AI agents, so what emerging features or trends do you see that you think could make the biggest impact? Um, yeah, for people building agents, for people using agents, for enterprises. Yeah, what do you think?
Um, I think just like monitoring observability and guardrails, like that's going to be a
Okay,
big one. I think there's a lot we need to do
right,
in that space. Like I'm sure even with like traditional machine learning models, right? Like
right,
just deploying the model, that's not where it ends. Like
right,
monitoring is a pretty big piece of it because if you don't know where things are going wrong, then how are you going to improve on things? And with agents,
right,
all multi agents, all the more so because like it's just a debugging nightmare to start. And like once you deploy, then yeah, like if as the stakes grow higher, right, we need to be able to make sure that these systems are as reliable as possible. Otherwise, we are going to end up in uh, we aren't going to be able to move the needle, more than where we are today, where like you're
yeah,
always going to want that. human confirmation or
Yeah,
yeah, to be like, okay, I trust this. Like
absolutely.
how do we go from I don't trust an agent to okay, I trust this AI, right?
Yeah,
That's a big one. And in terms of just like emerging features and trends in general, I think multimodality is coming in
yeah,
hot and fast, both in terms of how we interact with agents and the kind of data that we expect these applications
right,
to work with. So, like voice
right.
agents, I'm sure you've seen. I
Yep.
also had someone ask me after my talk the other day about how you would use multimodal data to create memories. I'm like, and that blew my mind.
Ah,
I'm like, I hadn't thought of that. So I think they were looking at a computer use case, and they were like,
okay.
hey, like, what if memories in this case could be a series of screenshots of how the agent completed a particular computer use task? I'm like, that is,
Wow, okay.
yeah. I'm like, that really blew my mind. So yeah, I think multi everything is the future.
Okay.
Multi
Multi,
modality, agents,
right.
lingual.
Oh
Yeah.
man. Uh, absolutely. I think you hit two very important points. Observability is going to be the thing. I don't think without that we will have any sort of real enterprise use cases. We need to have that.
Hmm.
Maybe it's cute to get someone from that sort of team here, you know?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
definitely watched that one. Yeah, because yeah,
Right?
like I don't have all the answers either, but like the big question is how do I go from I trust only humans to I trust
Right.
both
Absolutely. Yeah.
AI and humans.
Yeah. All right. Let's figure out a way to do that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Apoorva, this has been amazing. Uh,
Same. I had so much
yeah,
fun.
I know, you are a AI like engineer practitioner who has transitioned to sort of a very highly public customer facing role. I'm seeing a lot of your like content now that you're in this role at MongoDB. Yeah, so I'm super proud and
Thank you.
rooting like so many of other folks, I think. So yeah, before letting you go, I always ask this question to all the guests.
Okay.
Um, what is your one favorite product? It could be anything, physical,
What
digital,
is
anything. Your one favorite product if you want to choose.
Ooh, put me on the
Yeah.
spot.
You
What is
cannot
my
say
one?
MongoDB, but yeah,
No, yeah, that'd be boring. But
yeah,
what is my one favorite product?
yeah.
I think right now I've been using Claude a lot. I know that is also probably like it's
Ah,
not like the hot thing, but I've been using Claude a lot for my writing. So
okay.
the way I use it is like I a lot of times like I have bunch of thoughts in my head.
Right,
So then I'll just like put it down as quickly as I can in a Google Doc just to like
right,
write this big paragraph. And then I use
right,
Claude to be like, hey, tell me if this is too wordy. Can you make it more like
right,
concise or precise? Because like, and that way I'm um, putting my voice into it, but also
right,
a part of like what I want to put out into the world is like clear and concise stuff. And sometimes
right.
I am unable to get myself to do that. So that is where I'm using tools like Claude or Grammarly. That's another one. Like
Nice.
that's one of
Okay.
my favorite.
Yeah. Cloud, I definitely Cloud. Yeah. I use it more so for coding. Interesting that different people find like different use cases.
Yeah.
For writing, um, but that's awesome. Maybe I should do that too.
So are you
Yeah.
using Claude Code or
I mean, Claude within Cursor for coding, I feel that
I
is
see.
much, much better
Interesting. Okay.
than if I toggle to OpenAI models,
Yeah.
it becomes too wordy and it doesn't give me the right
Yes,
code,
yeah. So I think
right?
in general, like, okay, so I think that was my big observation too. Like, just in terms of
Okay.
like quality of anything, I'm just finding Claude to be my go-to.
Right, right.
Yeah,
Yeah, awesome. So very cool. This is a very good data set that I'm collecting, and you're the first one to actually say Claude and Grammarly. So,
yeah.
uh, very good. Apurva, thank you so much. We are super happy that you came on to the podcast.
No, this was fantastic. Thank you so much for having me. And
Uh,
yeah, I look forward to another one of these.
Definitely.